Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Black Ops 2 In-Depth. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Select Fire attachment, and this is a very complicated attachment that changes multiple variables on different guns and affects each gun differently, so we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to be going over each and every individual weapon. We're going to be doing some wall testing, some damage testing, some range testing, and some in-game footage. The in-game footage that you see right now is me using the SCAR H with Select Fire, which has been my favorite Select Fire weapon so far. I'll tell you why in a little bit. I'm playing against a really good team on slums domination here and just kind of struggling to hold my own, but we're going to be varying up the gameplay quite a bit. The first thing that I need to tell you about Select Fire is exactly how it changes your fire rate. If the weapon that you're putting it on is fully automatic, it's going to turn it into a burst fire weapon. If it's a burst fire weapon, it'll go to fully auto, and if it's a semi-auto, it'll go to full auto. So bear in mind that if you're at full auto, you'll step one down to burst fire, and if you're at burst fire or semi-auto, you're going to go up to fully auto. However, it changes the weapons a lot more than this. Select Fire will always change the recoil pattern on the weapon, and I'm going to talk about those individually. And most importantly, it can change the range and rate of fire on these weapons. For the range variable, I'm going to show you on the SWAT 556, which is so far the only one that I've been able to find has a change in range, but it is a colossal change in range. Let's swap over to some Nuketown testing to take a look at that. We're now in Nuketown. I'm using the regular SWAT 556, nothing funny about it. It's a burst fire gun, and at this range I can kill him in one burst. Yep, no problems with that. That was about the maximum range that I could get him in one burst, but we're going to swap over to a SWAT 556 that has the Select Fire attachment and has been put into the fully automatic mode. I shot him 3 times, and he didn't die at the exact same range. I'm like, well, you know, maybe the buffer zone's a little screwed up. Maybe we moved. So let's move him up closer, and 1, 2, 3, again, not dead. That's like a 50% decrease in range right there. So tell him to move up even closer. I'm trying to get a good feel for exactly what the range reduction is, but I honestly can't quite quantify it. There we go, 3 shots again up close, nothing funny going on. So I'm like, okay, well, just get right up in my face here, and I'm going to shoot you 1, 2, 3. Nope, still not cut. The SWAT 556 gets a massive reduction in range. It still does retain a 3-shot kill potential, but I practically have to be barrel stuffing people like this to be able to do it. It's just ludicrous the amount of range that's been reduced from this weapon. However, that's not the only thing that's been changed. We're now looking at a wall test of the regular SWAT 556 shooting in burst fire mode, and as you can see, the clusters are quite tight. It has a little bit of burst delay, so I can't overburst it or spray super fast like some of the other weapons, but we're about to swap over to the fully automatic SWAT 556. I know that the spread patterns might be a little bit harder to see because I'm standing far back, but I believe that is a better way to test the recoil on assault rifles because they kick a lot less than submachine guns or shotguns or something like that. So I need to stand further back to get a good feel for the spread, and as you can tell, the fully automatic SWAT 556 is way less accurate. It gets a huge reduction in accuracy when you put Select Fire on this weapon. I'd really never use this weapon in Select Fire because the range and the accuracy are both very greatly nerfed. If you're wondering what it is that's going on here, it's that the Select Fire attachment is actually changing the center speed of the weapons. And for those of you that don't know, the center speed is the speed at which your weapon comes back from rest. If you think about it, if you shot one shot, your gun would kick upward or to the left or to the right to some degree, and then it would need a fraction of a second to come back and rest. A high center speed means it'll come back and rest very quickly. A low center speed means that it steadies very slowly. For example, a low center speed weapon would be something like the Dragunov in old Call of Duties, and a high center speed weapon would be like the PP90 from MW3. It just comes back to rest very quickly. Select Fire is changing the center speeds. On the semi-automatic weapons and on the burst fire weapons, we're getting center speed decreases, which is going to add recoil to those weapons. And on the weapons that are fully automatic, when you change them to burst fire, the strategy guide says that your center speed increases, which means they get more accurate. And because of the nature of the burst and the timing, there are fractions of a second when you're not shooting the gun, and that greatly increases the accuracy along with the increased center speed. So there's a lot of things going on with accuracy, and at this point in the video I'm going to take a little break and just stick with the gameplay, and I'm going to talk about each weapon individually, but when a test is valid I'm going to swap off of the gameplay and show you a test of accuracy. When I tested the MTAR, I found that it was somewhat more accurate. Not the biggest of changes, but definitely noticeable. Probably not the best attachment for that weapon. The Type 25 got a lot more accurate. I would say that the Select Fire is a good attachment for that weapon because it very greatly increases the accuracy. There are a lot of different changes going on with the SWAT 556. 2 of them we've talked about. There's way more recoil, meaning less accuracy, and there's way less range, a huge nerf in the range. However, you did get an increase of RPM up to 33%, so it went from 600 RPM to 900 RPM, which is a good thing. However, overall I would recommend that you not use the select fire attachment on the SWAT 5.56 because the more recoil and the less range is just going to make it too difficult to deal with, at least for me personally. The FAL's recoil pattern didn't change very much. It increased the recoil just a little bit, but overall the FAL was still a very accurate weapon. It did get a 13% reduction in RPM. This isn't a huge reduction, and it's probably a little bit faster than most of you guys can click that mouse button or pull your right trigger finger, just depending on your oversample rates, but it was a reduction. The only weapon that I can say had pretty much no change was the M27. That is an extremely accurate, low damage assault rifle as is. It's a lot like the Modern Warfare 2 ACR. And when I put it in burst fire mode, I would say that it was just barely more accurate, but it pretty much didn't change that weapon at all. I'd say it's a wasted attachment on the M27. I felt that the SCAR-H was a special case for assault rifles and deserved its own little testing segment. This is the normal, fully automatic SCAR-H, no attachments, no nothing, and I particularly like it despite the very high recoil. Previously I was just running it with grip because grip kind of cut back on the recoil a little bit, but not a whole lot. But as you can see, it's a monster, it kicks everywhere. I'd pretty much have to shoot it in burst anyway, but when I put it into burst fire, so that it's by default in burst, and it has that increased center speed, it is way more accurate. Like I said, I'm not sure if you're looking on a mobile device and you can really see the wall that well or not, but I'm no longer shooting the ceiling up there. I can very accurately ping the wall in very tight little clusters. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get this guy out of the way of doing the testing video here. Now we're going to go back to the testing. I feel that the SCAR-H gets the biggest benefit from select fire out of any weapon in the assault rifle class. The SMR goes fully automatic, but you get a lot more recoil and you get 11% reduction in RPM. Again, I don't think that's too big a reduction, but the recoil makes it a bit problematic for me, especially when the weapon kicks a lot in semi-automatic anyway, so probably wouldn't use it there. I definitely would not use it on the M8A1 because that gives the M8A1 crazy bad recoil. It's a huge difference. I would really recommend that you avoid it on the M8A1 because it'll make your gun kick like a mule. The AN94 is a very complicated weapon. It has a variable fire rate built into the weapon itself, and that the first two shots shoot like 2 or 3 times as fast as the rest of them, and when you put select fire on this weapon, lots of weird things happen. So the AN94 is so special, it's going to get its own episode later. I just don't want to take up 5 minutes of this episode to cover it. Now we're going to move on to SMGs. SMGs were in general a lot simpler than the assault rifles because we have a lot less quirky SMGs. I'm going to lump 3 of them into the same category here. The MP7, the PDW, and the MSMC I would say are somewhat more accurate. They gained an average amount of accuracy, nothing too crazy about it, just kind of what I was expecting with accuracy. Of those 3, I would say that select fire is useful on the PDW and MSMC because it increases their accuracy, and those 2 can kill in 3 shots anyway, whereas the MP7 can't. So you do have 1 burst potential with both the PDW and MSMC, and it's not a bad attachment for those guns. Maybe not so much on the MP7. When I put select fire on the Scorpion, I didn't notice much difference. Obviously it was in burst fire, but it only kicked slightly less. The Scorpion is still a very inaccurate weapon, and the burst fire didn't help much with that. The CHICOM is already a burst fire SMG, so when you put it in select fire mode, it actually becomes fully automatic. However, it kicks a little bit more in fully automatic mode, not as much or as big a change as a lot of the other SMGs, but it is slightly less accurate in fully auto mode. Of note, it shoots 10% slower when in fully auto mode, so it shoots at the exact same speed that the MP7 and the Vector do, so you don't get a lot of benefit from going full auto with the CHICOM. The Vector I found to be a little bit special, so I decided to do another wall test here in Nuketown with that. This is the Vector in fully automatic mode, just normal, no select fire, nothing funny going on with it, and you can see it has a moderate amount of recoil for submachine guns. It's not super low recoil, but I mean, it's actually a little bit better than the SCAR-H assault rifle. You can definitely work with that. However, when I swap it over to the select fire and put it in burst mode, I'm bursting it as fast as possible and even overbursting it a little bit, and you can see that it is much more accurate. Of all the submachine guns that I tested, I was going to say that the Vector is probably the only one that's really useful with select fire. I always kind of like the EOTech sight on this gun for some reason, so now I kind of run it with EOTech and select fire, and it's not half bad. At the end of this very long episode, my final recommendation when it comes to select fire is to be careful with it. Select fire can be one of the very best or one of the very worst attachments for your gun, just kind of depending on what weapon you choose it for. I'd recommend that you use this episode as a guide. I'm sure that there are a lot of other funny things about select fire that I've probably missed that are out there, so I recommend that when you use select fire, test it yourself, test the recoil, test the range, test all of these things, and see if it's floating your boat or not. Well guys, that's all for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned something useful. If you'd like to check out my previous episode on the M1216 shotgun, you can click the box on the left, it'll open in a new window, and when my next episode goes live, it'll be on a drop shot nerf that's in Black Ops 2, and that's the box on the right. As always, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.